Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian angle on what's going on in the world. And I'm joined, as I am every week, by my co-host, Richard Ebeing, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another round of Libertarian Angle.
It's good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. If this is your first exposure to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org, where we got 30 years of principled, uncompromising perspectives on liberty. All right, Richard, we've had for the last several weeks this extensive series on socialism, which obviously is a burning issue of our time. It's something that is being widely discussed across America. And we've reached the end of this series with our final segment. We've sort of wrapped it up in the last segment with where we are in America today with a giant welfare state way of life, which is a socialist system, even though lots of Americans don't want to acknowledge that. And then you've got the gigantic military structure, which is another socialist system, as the Libertarian Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman pointed out. And we've discussed all the ramifications of that, of all the adverse impact that is having on American society, and has really effectively destroyed freedom in America. So it's now time to discuss what the alternative is, which of course is the libertarian paradigm, or what might be called the free market paradigm, or free enterprise, or private property order, limited government. And so I thought, well, let's set forth the foundational structure of that particular paradigm. I mean, what we're talking about is a way of life in which essentially there is a separation of economy in the state, healthcare in the state, retirement in the state, and a limited government republic where people are free to engage in economic enterprise without any government interference. Just as we have a separation of church and state, and the government is prohibited from forcing people to go to church or fund churches and so forth. So it would be with economy and economic activity, that the government would be prohibited from just interfering with economic activity. People would be free to engage in any economic enterprise without seeking the government's permission with a license or a permit, or going through a bunch of hoops or paying bribes to public officials. And then the market would ferret out, who stays in business and who doesn't. The consumer is sovereign in this type of system. It's a system where people are free to keep everything they earn. No income tax, no IRS, and to decide for themselves what to do with it. And so there's no mandatory charity. There's no Social Security, which is, of course, is a welfare state program, just like food stamps and public housing and foreign aid and the rest of them, corporate bailouts. There's no Medicare or Medicaid, no occupational licensure, medical licensure, no government regulation of healthcare. There's a separation of healthcare in the state as well. There's a separation of education in the state. No more compulsory attendance laws, school taxes. The government's just not involved in education at all. Total free market. Open borders, free movements of goods and services and people. Unilateral free trade, people free to trade with anybody in the world because it's their money. They're free to do whatever they want with it. And people are free to cross borders in search of a better life, to pursue happiness, one of the fundamental natural God-given rights that Jefferson talks about in the Declaration of Independence. So it's a radically different philosophy. Limited government, no more foreign interventionism, no more massive military establishment, a limited government republic, which was the type of governmental system that the Constitution brought into existence. No Federal Reserve, no central planning, which again is a socialist system. A free market monetary system where the market decides what the medium of exchange is. So what we're talking about is a total free market society and a government that is limited in its powers to the extent that it's a republic rather than a national security state, which is what we have today. Now, what's the advantage of this? Well, there's numerous advantages. For one thing, it liberates the private sector. I mean, that is the ideal of freedom. And now people say, oh, well, Jacob, that's not possible. That's utopia and all this. Well, it can't be utopia if it's been done in the past, and that's when we point, and I have in the past, point to the 19th century, and that's where I've gotten attacked because people saying, "Oh, you're saying the 19th century was a libertarian panacea," and I've never said that. We know there was bad things: slavery, women's rights, tariffs, and so forth. But the 19th century is instructive on what can be accomplished, what's possible. And this was a society with no income tax, no IRS, no drug laws, limited government republic, all the things I've described. And this was one of the keys to rising standards of living. I mean, this is one of the great contributions that America has made to history, is that Americans discovered the causes of wealth. I mean, we hear a lot about the causes of poverty, and that's what, Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, and that's what socialism's all about, trying to combat poverty. Well, the American people realized that poverty is the natural state. Is what is it that causes wealth in a society? It was a question that was first raised by Adam Smith in the same year as the Declaration of Independence, in his book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. So this type of system where people are free to accumulate savings, a lot of it would go into the banks, which then businessmen would go and borrow as capital. They'd go out and buy better tools, better equipment. That would make workers more productive. That would increase productivity. That would increase revenues to the firm, which then enabled the employer to pay higher wages. So here was the key to higher wages, higher standards of living, that was amplified by free trade, because people were giving up things they valued less for things they valued more. Here was the secret for the tremendous rise in the standard of living throughout the 19th century. And that trajectory, if it had been left free to continue, would have been unbelievable, Richard. I mean, it just boggles the mind to think how little poverty there would be in this country had that trajectory stayed. And instead, of course, as we've talked about in this series, the trajectory was stopped with the adoption of the welfare state way of life, the warfare state way of life, until where we are today. But at least we have an alternative paradigm for people to consider. There is a choice here that people can make, one that leads to greater peace, liberty, prosperity, and harmony, versus the one we have today, which leads to impoverishment, oftentimes death, a police state, and the destruction of our liberty. What do you think?
Well, I think that part of the difficulty that our fellow Americans, in fact, people in general around the world, find it difficult to appreciate in terms of, well, how would the market take care of retirement? How would the market take care of health care? How would the market take care of this, that, and the other? Is because for so many years, in some cases many decades, the government has co-opted this. So not seeing the market methods and mechanisms working in front of them, people have a difficult time of imagining it. Let's suppose that around the time of the First World War, 100 years ago, the United States government had said, and the progressives of that time had said, that there's a crisis in America. And that is, there are poor people, and particularly little kids, who are not guaranteed to have proper and reasonably priced fitting shoes. Don't people have an entitlement, a right to have covering on their feet? Surely it's not just a privilege, but a right. And how do we know that the market will supply people with shoes, and that little kids will have shoes as their feet grow? Or that parents will always be willing to buy their kids shoes? So now the government takes over the shoe industry. The government centrally plans the manufacture, the provisioning, and the distribution of shoes. Now someone comes along 100 years later, like you or me, and says, what the hell is the government doing in the shoe business, Jacob? Why are they busy making shoes? That should be something reasonable for the market to. Oh, no. How can you be sure that the poor will have shoes? How can we be sure that that people with bunion preconditions will have shoes made that fit the shape of their feet? What about the little? What if a parent wants to just spend their money on frivolous things and entertainment, or going out or gambling, and the little kid, their feet are growing and they don't get a new pair of shoes? If government doesn't guarantee shoes for all, a single payer for shoes that is taken care of by taxing the 1%. How can we be sure that people will be covered on their little feet? No, no, no. Government has to keep guaranteeing shoes for all. Now, of course, this is a ludicrous example, Jacob, because we take it for granted that people buy their own shoes and purchase it for themselves and their family members on a market. And in this market, what do we see? A wide variety and diversity of different types of shoes, styles of shoes, casual shoes, running shoes, exercising shoes, fancy dress shoes, on and on and on. And you have multiple suppliers and offering them at a wide variety of prices. You can go to Walmart or Marshall's, for instance, and get discount shoes, which fit fine and wear fine for quite a while. Or you can go to an expensive, a shoe store that's specializing, different styles and different qualities of materials that may or may not fit as well or better than the Walmart or Marshall store shoes. But you get to choose. There's a wide spectrum of styles, uses, and prices and qualities of material that you can choose from. What about clothes? That's the case with clothes. That's the case with the kind of restaurants we go to. Now, for example, what's today? Tuesday. Thursday is my birthday. And, once again, I'll be 39 years old. I know that you know that, Jacob. I actually share my birthday date with one of your favorite presidents, Jacob, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I know my mother held off to giving birth to me until that day so that she knew that she could irritate me for the rest of my life, that I have to share this with Franklin Roosevelt. Okay? That's the kind of mom I had. Anyway, because she voted Liberal Democrat. She cried when FDR died. Anyway, so she plagued me with this. But anyway, so I'm having a birthday in a couple of days. Now, I'm a college professor. Am I rolling in dough? No, I make a good middle-class salary, as most professors in institutions of higher learning. But I'm not Bill Gates or in that category. But my wife and I are going out to one of the very nicer high-end restaurants in Charleston Thursday evening to celebrate my birthday. So people decide how to allocate their income. They can go to an expensive steakhouse like we are. Sorry, vegetarians who are watching the show. Or we can go to a burger place or a fast food restaurant or a sit-down restaurant, which is less expensive with different varieties on the menu. But the market provides this wide spectrum. And you know what the market enables people to do? When we go to this restaurant on Thursday evening, there'll be people like myself in a more modest middle-class income, and there'll be wealthier members of the Charleston community there. It serves all of us. The same way with vacations. Oh, how could a poor person go on a holiday if government didn't guarantee vacations? You save your money, you go to a Motel 6, or you stay at a fancy hotel. You drive to a neighboring state, or you take a plane ride to having saved some money, and you have an exotic holiday halfway around the world. The market provides all of these varieties and spectrums. If there's a profit to be made, and if there are people, a sufficient number of people that they are willing and are able to cover in terms of the price that they are willing to pay, the expenses to provide it plus a little bit of profit, the market provides it. Think of television, Jacob. Oh, government used to provide government guaranteed airwaves, CBS, NBC, and ABC under government regulations, the FCC. They abolished that. And what do we now see? This plethora, this vast array of different specialized targeted niche markets for television, streaming movies, fitting many different categories, right? You buy a bundle, basic, high end with every conceivable channels, but, sports up the kazoo. The market, if there's a profit to be made, the market fills the niche for the modest income and for the wealthy, for the middle and for those who are in our society considered poor. Televisions, clothes, cars, everything. Now, let us suppose if we take these things for granted, not even thinking about it, Jacob, why would we not expect the same thing if government got out of the healthcare business? Do people get sick? Yes. Are there minor illnesses and are there serious illnesses? Yes. People would take out insurance policies. They would belong to cooperatives. They would put their money aside and maybe not take out as an expensive a policy. And if something happens, they built up their savings so as not have to be paying high premiums on a relative basis. Each individual, each family would pick the package that fits them, like and if there's profits to be made, the market would fill it with different niches of different medical care and treatment and insurance programs. The same thing with retirement. Do we not already have savings account, IRAs, mutual funds? You can go down the litany of them. All of this would then apply in the wider spectrum of offerings and availabilities if people had back all of the money that the government siphons off from them in their monthly withholding for Social Security from their paychecks. The market would provide all of this, and we would come to take that for granted. It's not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of confidence. It's just looking around us and seeing the empirical reality that markets fill all of these little nuanced niches, even little market niches, as well as the broad market demands, with anything and everything we want in a wide spectrum of what people can afford. Now, if I can just continue with this for another minute or two, Jacob. What about the poor? What about the needy? What about those who are fallen upon hard times? We talked about this in some previous segments in this series, did we not, Jacob? In the 19th century, when living conditions were far less than today on average, and even for the well-to-do of that time, what we saw was the emergence of these mutual insurance societies. In Britain, they were called the Friendly Societies. We saw the emergence of charities, many religious-based, some not, in which people who were at that time already better off than some of their fellow creatures in a society gave of their time, gave of their money, helped sponsor orphanages for abandoned children, hospitals, charity education, all of this that enabled to fill these niches for those who were less well off in that earlier time, and with great success. We have a bountiful, wealthy society today. And if we were freed from taxes and the wealth could be plowed back into even more production and output and improvement of goods, we'd be even wealthier as time went on. So that would eliminate the poverty of those who would need a helping hand. There'd be fewer in that category. And the rest of us would be a lot well off to have the discretionary income in a greater abundance to show that benevolence towards our fellow humans for those who had fallen upon hard times or special circumstances. The market would do this far better than relying upon socialist central planners who impose these straitjackets of government command and availability on all of us in their name of assuring something for everyone, which means all of us reduced to what the few decide the many should have.
Yeah, I think your point about what people grow up with and they're accustomed to is so valid, because when people grow up with something or they're born with something and they're taught that it's freedom, the thought of changing that system or abandoning that system just frightens them to death. And I think your examples are very good, like on the shoes and stuff. Take, for example, open borders. Nobody gives a second thought to the fact that people are free to cross state borders. Just think anybody can cross into Virginia anytime they want. Terrorists, murderers, rapists, thieves. Nobody's there controlling the borders. In an objective sense, like that's a frightening thing. I'm being sarcastic, but that's what frightens people about opening up the international border. The terrorists are coming, the murderers are getting. But nobody worries about the fact that people are free to come into Virginia and do all these horrible things, terrorists and murders and so forth. Why? Because they've grown up with it. It's just normal. If it had been the opposite, and there had been immigration controls and travel restrictions that each state could impose on its own state, and then libertarians were to come along and say, hey, let's open the domestic borders, people would freak out. Oh my gosh, no, you mean everybody could come into Virginia? What if everybody just moved to New York? What if everybody went to California to get on welfare? And it was the same thing. And your healthcare example is a perfect example because, when we were growing up, there was no Medicare, there was no Medicaid. Doctors love what they did in life. I grew up in Laredo, Texas, on the border, which the Census Bureau said was the poorest city in the United States. And every day, doctors' offices were filled with people, and they knew they couldn't pay. And yet, nobody ever turned anybody away. That doctors felt that ethical, moral duty to give back to the community. They were among the wealthiest people in town, second only to the people that had oil revenues coming in. And that's genuine charity as compared to the IRS forcing people collecting taxes to help out seniors with their health care expenses. But notice that since we've all been now growing up since the 1960s into this system, that's become the new norm. And then when we libertarians suggest, well, why don't you just get rid of these socialist programs? Oh my gosh, there'd be people dying in the streets. And that's what socialism does. It causes people to lose their faith in each other, in themselves, in freedom and free markets. Healthcare costs before Medicare and Medicaid came into play, along with the medical licensure aspect of it too. That's the supply side, where the government operates as a protection racket to protect healthcare workers from competition. That's what licensure laws do. But before the big Medicare and Medicaid, that healthcare costs were extremely low. They were stable. Nobody even had major medical insurance. Some people had catastrophic insurance, but if you go to the grocery store today, you don't have grocery store insurance to protect yourself against the soaring costs of groceries. And that was the way healthcare was. Going to the doctors was like going to the grocery store. You just paid cash or you wrote a check or whatever. It just wasn't a big factor in people's lives until Medicare and Medicaid came along. Now suppose, following your analogy of the shoe industry, suppose in the grocery store business, the government had taken it over back, let's say, in 1930s, along with Social Security and so forth. So the government plans the whole distribution. They own the grocery stores. They plan everything. And of course, there's only a certain select number of goods. It would be like the grocery store version of the post office. You go in there and you buy a certain amount of groceries, but nothing like we see today. It would just be a government-run grocery store, sort of like what you see in real socialist countries like Cuba, North Korea. The shelves bare and few goods here and there. Some of the fruits and vegetables are rotting. And then we libertarians come along and say, why don't we just get government out of the grocery store business? Oh my gosh, are you kidding? How can we be guaranteed that there would be food for people? I mean, how would we know that there would be food? And yet, Richard, you'll recall that famous essay by Frederick Bastiat, the French free market legislator, how does Paris get fed? And he points out that you go into a grocery store, and everybody takes it for granted because we were all born and raised under the system. You walk into a grocery store, and it's miraculous. I mean, overnight, somebody has brought all these fruits and vegetables, organic and not organic. The shelves are filled. I mean, it's almost like a miracle of the market. But nobody's planning this in a central planning aspect. Each company, each group of people across the world are planning their own economic activities, and somehow or another, overnight, all this wonderful stuff shows up in the grocery store and multiple grocery stores. But everybody just sort of ho-hum, well, this is just the way life is because we've all been born and raised in it. Well, what we're suggesting as libertarians is that this could apply in all aspects of our lives. Healthcare, education, retirement, drugs, everything, borders, that all we have to do is the same faith that we have in how the grocery stores operate in what is relatively a free market. We take that same concept and apply it to healthcare, education, the whole gamut of free market activity.
Yeah, I think that we should also keep in mind that it's not just the economic activities, but what is often come under civil liberties, as you and I hope most of our viewers and listeners are aware that there are certain civil liberties that are severely under attack in America today. Social pressures to narrow them, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the idea of hurtful talk, harmful talk, racist talk, insensitive sexist talk, and that the traditional notion of freedom of speech needs to be narrow and confined. In Europe, it is an imprisonable offense to question whether the Holocaust occurred. Now, I want to assure every listener, I happen to believe the Holocaust occurred. I happen to have met people who were in concentration camps. I know of people who died in concentration camps. So, that's not the issue. But so what if a person believes that the Holocaust didn't occur. It's a matter of reason and persuasion and argument and fact. Now, if somebody wants to say this, it's not the business of the state to say this is unconscionable, it's going to offend people. Yeah, some people might be offended, and I would even argue as a person, rightfully so. What do you mean my parents weren't killed? Stop being an idiot if it's a fact. And this person wants to deny the fact. But if he wants to deny the fact, that's part of the freedom of a society. If someone wants to say the earth is not a ball circulating around the sun, it's flat. Flat earth people. Should there be a law against flat earth people who want to deny the law of physics? No. Freedom of speech should be viewed as absolute in this sense. Now, many people want to narrow this. Now, let us suppose they succeed in doing this, far more than has already been the case in the United States, Jacob. Fast forward 50 years from now, and such more confined limits on freedom of speech and freedom of the press had been in effect. And then someone like you and I come along and say, what the hell is the government involved telling people what they can say or not? Just free it all. It'll cause anger. It will cause divisiveness. People will feel hurtful if we just allow people to say anything they want. But we take this for granted. If you read people about the importance of freedom who were writing during the Second World War, not just classical liberals, not even what today we consider conservatives, or not even New Deal liberals, okay? All of them took for granted that even while you're fighting Nazis, okay, in the literal sense, right? You don't abridge freedom of speech unless, it's a public matter, like, you're going to tell where the troops are on a battlefield or something. But in the normal everyday sense, Jacob, everybody across the political spectrum believed and defended against government restriction the right of freedom of speech. And we have taken that for granted. Who are you to tell somebody what they can or cannot say, as long as they peacefully go about their affairs? You can reason against them. You can argue against them. You can demonstrate the facts are exactly opposite of what they're claiming. But that is discourse in a free society. Now, if this gets into effect, like the shoe example, 50 years from now, people will say, how can you just let people say anything they want? What if it's hurtful? What if it's blasphemous? What if it's racist? What if it's sexist? Well, that will cause tangers and antagonisms and take us back to bad times. And then we'll be fighting the same battle, only about more civil liberties than just usually economic issues today, because the state has been most aggressive in restraining and restricting those over the last several decades. But this is a fundamental problem of understanding the seamless web of liberty, whether it be personal freedom, what we call the civil liberties, like in the Bill of Rights, or economic liberty in the marketplace. We must believe in, see the importance of, and have confidence in the capacity of men to peacefully go about their intercourses and their exchanges and their business through reason, persuasion, buying and selling, higgling and haggling, whether it be over some law of physics or the buying of a hat in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges we face in our time is in causing people to understand that they're not free, that they don't live in a free society. And that's a tremendous hurdle. That was a big revelation for me. When I discovered libertarianism, or prior to discovering libertarianism, I had no doubts I was free, that I lived in a free country. And then I discovered libertarianism, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is just a great big lie I've been taught throughout grade school and high school and college and so forth. That's one big challenge, is getting people to understand that. And then the next challenge is to say, which is a relative, the same type of challenge, is what does freedom really mean? Identify what the infringements on freedom are. A lot of people think that Social Security and Medicare and farm subsidies, that is freedom, because it gives choice to people. That when the government gives you money, you have choice. And so they think, oh, well, see, this, I'm free. Well, this is a perverted view of freedom. Freedom is the right to keep everything you have, that you earn, that you produce, that you inherit. It isn't the right to take somebody else's money from them. So that's a challenge we have, is to explain what genuine freedom really is. And then and then to explain that in order to achieve genuine freedom, you've got to eliminate the infringements on freedom, and one of which, as you talked about, is restrictions on speech. I mean, the basic libertarian concept is you have a right to live your life any way you want, so long as you're not initiating force or fraud against another person. No murder, rape, stealing, and other acts of violence that violate other people's right to live their lives. But in that context of making peaceful choices, people make choices that other people don't approve of. They make bad choices. They may spend all their time studying Nazism and preaching Nazism and so forth. Well, that is the essence of a free society. If people are not free to choose wrongly, as long as their conduct is peaceful, then you're not living in a free society. I mean, that's how you know you're in China, for example, where people are free to make choices so long as the choices are the right ones as defined by the state. It's when people are free to make those wrongful choices that are peaceful in nature, that's when you know you got a free society. And then the final thing is, how bad do people want to be free? Once they recognize they're not free, once they realize that there's infringements on liberty, how bad do they want to achieve freedom before they pass from this earth? So you put those three things together, and if you hit everything right, I think you got a really good shot at finally achieving a free society.
In the contemporary environment with progressivism and all this talk about hurtful words and bad words and harmful words, I too think that there are certain words the government needs to ban, Jacob. I feel hurt every time I hear the word socialism, every time I hear the word redistribution, every time I hear the word communism or collectivism or redistributivism. I find these hurtful and harmful words, and people say this without giving me a trigger warning. So I really think that government needs to ban these words because I'm being hurt by it. Now, I'm obviously being sarcastic.
I thought I was going to have to work on you.
Exactly. But you see, now, immediately, people would laugh at me, particularly on the left. They would laugh at me for saying this. Well, why should I not feel the same way? When they want to say, well, you can't say this word or that phrase or refer to this person or that person in a particular way, that doesn't mean that it's that common courtesy, politeness, proper and reasonable discourse would justify that language. I mean, all of us believe in etiquette, manners, good behavior, proper interaction with each other. And we all recognize when people act boorish or rude or impolite. But we don't expect the government to pass laws against rudeness or impoliteness, right? We expect these to be part of the social rules that people enforce and reinforce through the dynamics of free interaction in the social setting. And the same thing with words or ideas. There can be reasonable words and stupid words. There can be rational argument and emotional nonsense. But the response to that should not be a law, but people interacting and discussing and forming, or considering a person so stupid they just ignore them. There's a lot of people that ignore me, and there's occasionally a person that I ignore because I said, who could believe that nonsense? I'm not going to waste my time trying to reason with that person. We all have had those experiences. But you don't need the laws to do this. This is the dynamics of human conduct in the social setting, which has laws of guarding these things far better and more humane and consistent with freedom than the heavy hand of the state.
Yeah, no, I think it ought to be pointed out too is that people are abusive to each other. I think much more so than they would be in a free society. I think as the state has tightened the screws on people, both on the domestic side with the welfare state, the socialism, the drug war, immigration controls, the police state, and then especially on the warfare state side, where the U.S. government has been killing people on a continuous basis for at least 30 years. People that have never attacked or invaded or occupied the United States. At worst, they've simply retaliated for U.S. interventionism abroad. I think that as all these screws tighten on a citizenry, people do become less civil to each other. They become less nice. And I think that if we started achieving freedom by dismantling much of the oppression here at home with respect to welfare statism and warfare statism, bringing all the troops home and so forth, I think you'd see people becoming much more nice and polite to each other as compared to what we have today.
Yeah, part of it is the fact that when you introduce politics into human relationships, uh, everything becomes threatened. If that person gains control, if that coalition of groups have a majority, they then can use the state to impose their values, their beliefs, their attitudes, their desires upon the rest of the people. So everything becomes an antagonism and a fear that if I don't gain control, someone else with views and values different than mine will. So that reinforces this polarization that we see in our society of vilifying everybody, viewing them as evil as opposed to your own righteousness, because politics creates that environment. Would there still be stupid people saying irrational and idiotic things in a free society? Of course. We're talking about imperfect people in an imperfect world. But the intensity and the magnitude and the forcefulness of it that we're beginning to see even more in society than in the past would not be as great if we could diminish the role of government in human affairs.
Yeah, excellent point and well put. So, Richard, okay, on that note, we wrap up our series on socialism. I've greatly enjoyed the conversation. I hope you all tuning in have enjoyed the analysis of socialism as well. And Richard, any parting comments on our series here?
I would just say is that I would ask every viewer and listener, if you've listened to or watched part of this series, I understand there are differences of opinion, different views, different values, but the case that Jacob and I have attempted to make about the nature and the workings and consequences of socialism is due to our sincere and fundamental belief in the sanctity of the individual human being and the importance of his liberty to guide and direct his life as he chooses in peaceful association with others. And whenever the government encroaches upon that, of course, the extreme form of socialist central planning is the extreme version of it. Whenever the government does that, freedom is denied, a choice is narrowed, the spontaneity of human association is restricted. And in my view, and I know Jacob's view, that is not the basis of a healthy society. Freedom gives us a polite society, a prosperous society, and a good society in which human beings can blossom and have the true camaraderie and association of their fellow creatures without everybody worrying about one person using either legally or illegally a gun against them.
Well stated, Richard. All right, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Greatly enjoyed the series, Richard, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.